Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Today's episode is about Howell's campaign predictions. You heard it here first. We've got a little bit of, tiny little bit of Nature's Promise roasted mixed nuts, but we've got cranberry walnut mix after that, so we're in good shape. Take a slurp of coffee and pull up a chair and enjoy yourself. Does this sound like a hit piece to you? We've got Washington Examiner. I grew up in Oregon. The poll that's being discussed here is the Monmouth poll. That was brought up during Bernie Sanders' economic justice town hall in Iowa recently, and he scoffed at it. I'm scoffing not only at the poll, but also at Paul Bedard or Bedard or whoever the heck you are. I'm not too impressed with your article, and I'm also not very impressed with this survey. The presidential primary campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders appears to be crashing in Iowa. Nice neutral word there, crashing. And a top pollster said that he hasn't hit rock bottom yet. In the latest Monmouth poll of Iowa, Iowa, not Oregon. There's a Monmouth in Oregon, too. Sanders has sunk from 16% to 9% and is now, that's still Oregon. Yeah, they just polled Iowa. Anyway, 16% to 9% and is now fourth in a race he once led. That beautiful blue map. I don't know how anyone could look at that map that shows his fundraising from donors, from individual donors, covering the whole map and say that he's in fourth place. And now here's where you can see where we're going with this article. Senator Elizabeth Warren seems to be benefiting. She has surged to second behind former Vice President Joe Biden to 19% in the survey of Democratic voters in advance of the state's first in the nation caucus next year. Pollster Rachel Beitkofer has been predicting the shift of support from Sanders to Warren for months. The assistant director is Beitkofer of the Wason Center for Public Policy at Virginia's Christopher Newport University, blah, blah, blah. That's the part I always ignore when I'm hearing news. She dismissed his chances to win, Bernie's chances to win the 2020 Democratic nomination. She said that Sanders was the obvious choice in 2016 for younger voters and the not Hillary vote, especially after Warren decided not to run. But she told Secrets 2020 2020 was always going to struggle because Warren was always going to be better than him. Okay, I'm still trying to figure out this convoluted sentence, but Sanders was always going to struggle because Warren was always going to be better than him. There's some really objective reporting. Don't forget, progressives, typo, sorry to point out how shitty your article is. Progressives badly wanted Warren to run in 2016 and turned to Sanders because she didn't. Once they got reminded of how great she is, they switched back. And the early polls appear to show that since spring, I have said at some point Bernie and Warren would inverse, and it has already happened in Iowa, adding, once the other 40% of the electorate tunes in, it will happen nationally too, and that at some point Bernie will hit a 5% to 8% floor. Well, that sounds like the wet dream of John Cowan, president of Third Way. Let's talk about Howell's campaign predictions. You heard it here first. I want to jump ahead to my my pre-story assumption. I suspect strongly that the media and political elites already are planning to shift their support wholly behind Elizabeth Warren. I offer that first hack article as evidence. As a betting man, I would wager that if you had a candid conversation with John Cowan right now, he would say that his think tank buddies don't expect Joe Biden to win the Democratic nomination. Duh. I'd say that they already are betting, even though they still hedge, on Elizabeth Warren and will put increasing levels of support behind her going forward. I think they expect to give it to Warren in the second round of the national convention using superdelegates. I believe that Elizabeth Warren could get the traction she needs, especially with her big donors behind her, to beat out Bernie for the nomination, especially if it comes to the almost inevitable situation that the convention is contested and goes to a second round. But, now here's the big prediction, I can guarantee you that she won't beat Donald Trump. Reason 1. The most progressive faction of the progressive wing of the Democratic rank and file are hoping for a complete overhaul of the system and will not settle for tweaking. It's clear that the progressive base doesn't want to settle for moderate candidates in 2018 or in 2020. This frustration was voiced at Netroots by Cynthia Nixon, the actress and activist who is challenging New York's Democratic incumbent Governor Andrew Cuomo from the left. Cynthia says, "A lack of moderation was not the problem in 2016. We tried it their way and we lost to a racist extremist. Republicans are going to call us socialists no matter what we do, so we might as well give them the real thing." But for all the left-wing fervor gripping the Democratic Party, Warren's speech sounded like a blend of Hillary Clinton's 2016 theme, Stronger Together, combined with the progressive elements that make her appealing to the base. Warren didn't spend her time criticizing the Democratic establishment. She went after Republicans, which is what a lot of mainline Democrats are doing now. They spend all their time giving Trump more publicity and criticizing Republicans instead of focusing on how far to the right their own party has gone. The left flank of the left flank won't swallow a milder, more progressive version of Hillary Clinton. This quotation came from the YouTube channel New Progressive Voice. This is if you go to my article, I'm going to put that in the information section. You can click right on this video and listen. You can't see the man talking, but his voice makes a lot of sense. He reads a quotation from an article and then he reacts to it. Take Hillary Clinton. All of her tax write-offs, her wanting to expand Obamacare, her very mild forms of environmental intervention, still okay with fracking, still okay with the oil industry, still okay with taking super PAC money. Take Hillary Clinton and upgrade her by one notch, and you get Elizabeth Warren. Warren is not looking to make a fundamental difference to the economy, as she often likes to say. She wants to reel it in. He goes on to say, mainstream media consider Elizabeth Warren to be more favorable than Bernie Sanders, and I always think that is one of the prime indicators for progressives. The candidate that the corporate media is supporting is likely the candidate we should not be supporting. One can argue right now that they're trying to split the Warren and Sanders vote in order that Joe Biden has a clear pathway to the nomination. I don't know about that, but I do know that they're trying to split the Warren-Sanders vote. Elizabeth Warren has been making a steady climb in the polls, and she is going to become more and more a part of our discussion, whether we like it or not. He reads more from the article. Warren and Sanders have been conflated for years. Commentators often talk of a Sanders-Warren wing of the Democratic Party, but the two are not the same. And though Warren is an ally of many progressive causes, the best chance that we have to not just construct some better policy, but reconfigure a generation of American politics lies with Sanders running and capturing both the Democratic primary and the presidency. And then he says on the video, and though Warren is an ally of many progressive causes, he reads that whole quote, and then he says, and the key word is causes. She's not really a progressive in her backbone. She's tepid. She'll take on some causes. She does have a track record of having actually voted on some progressive policy, so we can't rob her completely of having at least a little bit of progressive streak in her backbone. And then he read, the best chance that we have to not just construct some better policy, but reconfigure a generation of American politics lies with Sanders running and capturing both the Democratic primary and the presidency, as I read a second ago. So then the response is, So if you want someone who believes that the foundation of America economically is fundamentally flawed and there needs to be a revolution of sorts, then it's not Elizabeth Warren you're going to want to vote for. You're going to want to vote for Bernie Sanders, who really recognizes that there needs to be a fundamental change in the way we do politics. Overturning Citizens United, Medicare for all becoming a fundamental right through a single-payer system, aggressive tactics toward ameliorating the climate crisis, actually banning fracking, making carbon tax sequestration. He would be much more aggressive than would Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth wouldn't look at the economic system as needing to be fundamentally changed. Instead, she feels again that it needs to be reeled in. Would she have been a better president than Clinton would have been? Not by much, but she would have been a better president when it comes to the progressive label. In terms of whether she'll keep what she says on the campaign trail, probably not. Would she keep some of it? Probably some of it, mainly as a way to get reelected. And then he read, to understand things, Sanders' background is unusual. He was trained in the dying remnants of the Socialist Party and cut his political teeth in trade union and civil rights organizing. His lifelong lesson, the rich were not morally confused, but rather have a vested interest in the exploitation of others. Power would have to be taken from them by force. So if you've ever heard a Bernie Sanders stump speech, you know that's what he says over and over and over. He says we have to take these guys on. We have to take on the big banks. We have to take on the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex. Big pharma, he just goes right through the list. Over and over, he believes that we have to take the power away from these guys, he would say, by force. So then the clarification. So in other words, he believes that the problem is intrinsic to the system. And it isn't that the rich people are immoral, they are just part of that exploitative system. And that's his message. That's what he believes fundamentally. Whereas Elizabeth Warren believes that the system is old and rusty, needs oiling, needs an upgrade, but doesn't need to be fundamentally changed. So you can expect that a Sanders presidency would get us to question whether or not someone should be able to own so much of the wealth of this planet or of this nation at the expense of everyone else. Warren likely wouldn't question that as much as attempt to persuade the rich to give more out of a sort of loyalty to America. Yeah, my reaction, I can see your faces right now. You're shaking your heads. That sort of loyalty they feel to America doesn't lead them to part with much of their ill-gotten gains. All right, here's another reason I am guaranteeing that Elizabeth Warren can't win against Donald Trump. Has anyone heard a Kamala or bust slogan being chanted? Biden or bust, Beto or bust, Booker or bust, Warren or bust, Amy or bust, Jay or bust, Castro or bust, Buttigieg or bust. You get the idea. Electoral leverage is being applied for only one candidate for president, but Bernie or bust is not the biggest problem for the Democratic Party establishment and their supporters. Writing in Common Dreams, novelist John Atchison concluded, a centrist candidate, which let's be honest, means one who is beholden to the uber-rich and corporations, cannot and will not address these truly existential issues. Only a progressive candidate can and will. A true progressive candidate. People understand two things. First, government has been taken over by oligarchs, and second, it no longer represents them. Some of them are mad as hell, and they vote for the likes of Trump because he at least shares their inchoate rage at the system, even if he reinforces it with his policies. Others are justifiably cynical and choose to stay home on Election Day. That happened a lot in 2016. Targeting a few more votes from the mythical center won't change that, which is the wisdom you hear when people are touting Joe Biden. Getting the no-shows to show will, and only a progressive can do that. So this article I'm quoting, you can click right on these links. Here is a little graphic courtesy of Philosoph Rob from Reddit. Elizabeth Warren's multi-billionaire donors, Bill Gates, Amy Goldman, Laurene Powell Jobs, Henry Laufer, Chaim Saban, George Soros, Steven Spielberg, Thomas Steyer. Most of these multi-billionaires also gave to Hillary Clinton. None have donated to Bernie Sanders. On Reddit, you can click this link and go right to it. Philosoph Rob again. Elizabeth Warren has received $1,061,376 from the securities and investment industry in her career. Do you think this might explain why Warren did not co-sponsor Senate Bill 805, Bernie's bill to tax Wall Street transactions? It's a good question. Here's an article called Warren Top Donors Include Individuals Who Represent Corporations. It says similar things to what Philosoph Rob says about major backing from lawyers and law firms, securities investment industry, and the conclusion. It is no surprise that Elizabeth Warren says one thing and does another when it comes to corporate interests. Warren claimed that when she made several $100,000s in her private law practice while still a Harvard law professor, she did it to help consumers and women. In fact, as my research demonstrated, Jacobson's research demonstrated, Warren represented large corporations such as Dow Chemical, a major utility company, and Travelers Insurance against the interest of consumers. Wow, that's slimy. Yes, Elizabeth, I'm calling you slimy. Third reason is the one I am most hopeful will lead her to drop out early, but if she stays in and actually gets the nomination, the following reason could explain why many mainline Democrats might shift their support away from her late in the primary process when she could most use their help. I think this is going to slowly dawn on the more savvy mainline Democrats, and then it's going to spread as they start talking about it. What I think they're going to figure out is that she's no populist, and the reason Democrats lost last time is because they didn't figure out that Donald Trump was appealing to populists. Now, even though some of those populists are starting to come to their senses, if they don't have a candidate like Bernie to grab them, they're going to look at someone like Elizabeth and they're going to say, I don't see her as any different than what we've been having for the last 6 or 7 presidencies. I don't see that things are going to change that much under Elizabeth Warren. I grew up in a rural area, and other people I've been chatting with who grew up in the Rust Belt say similar things about the values of the people who live there. In my rural upbringing, people would look at mainline people who are part of what Bernie calls the establishment, and would look at them and say, they're not working for me. I don't trust them. And you look at somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who's got some experience under her belt. And I think if they look at NAFTA and other trade deals, they look at the way things have gone, I don't see, and they probably wouldn't see, that's what I'm predicting here, that she's going to be enough of a reason to get up and go vote. I think they'll stay home if she's the alternative to Donald Trump, or else they'll just vote directly for Donald Trump. Now, here's the last reason. Now, it may look like I'm advocating for Bernie or Trump here, and I'm not. I'm advocating for Bernie or bust. But the Bernie or Trumpers get pulled in with the Bernie or busters when you're talking about what could happen in a general election. Now, the Bernie or bust people are applying leverage on purpose, but a lot of the leverage is already there. And so even though Bernie or busters are trying to augment it, it's a train that's already going. And even if Bernie or busters wanted to come to their senses, you couldn't stop this movement if you wanted to. There are more than enough burners already, both Democrats and independents, who will stay home, vote third party, write in Bernie, or support Trump, and thus ensure his reelection if a corporatist wins the Democratic nomination. When combined with the first 3 reasons of this article I'm reading from, there isn't much anyone can do, even those who favor leverage, to stop this train. It's largely a leaderless revolution, as all true revolutions are. When considering the combination of Democrats, Dem-Enter voters, and the independents who will simply refuse to back an anointed corporatist candidate in the general election, no matter who, talking sense into these idiots is not an option. So to conclude, Elizabeth Warren may still make a good show. She may even get as far as Hillary did, but I'm not predicting that, especially if the mainline Democrats come to their senses and realize that Elizabeth isn't going to work against a populist candidate or a pretend populist candidate, to be fair, like Donald Trump. I will predict that corporate America and transnational pseudo-America, they're really one and the same thing, will find no better chance of avoiding the existential threat, in John Cowan's words, of a Bernie Sanders presidency than Elizabeth Warren. I think if you're John Cowan and you don't care if Trump is elected, then Elizabeth is your best bet. And I think she knows this. I think she knows she's being used by Wall Street as a foil to Bernie Sanders. If she doesn't know it, she's not as smart as I think she is. Harvard law professor. We can't guess to what lengths that big money will go to twist and warp the electoral process to achieve their ends. I'm thinking ballot rigging and purging voter rolls and all the other dirty tricks that we've already seen. But if we can see what they're up to, and I think it's clear, even though I'm predicting it early, I think it's clear that they're trying to get behind Elizabeth Warren and anoint her the way they did Hillary. And if we see that coming, we can figure it out early enough to put all of our eggs in the opposite basket, which is Bernie Sanders. Here's hoping. You heard it here first. Unshaved, unbathed, unedited, and unscripted.